It's no secret that Donkey Kong Bananza has become one of my favorite video games of all time. As far as platformers go, in my opinion, nothing tops Donkey Kong Bananza. And one of the reasons Bananza is so fun is the same reason any good platformer is fun. That being where you actually platform. The different levels or kingdoms, or in this case, layers that make up the main campaign of the game. This is a very difficult ranking because again, I enjoy this game so much that I think all of these layers are good. However, it's a YouTuber's plight to have to rank them. So today we're going to be going through all 17 different layers in Donkey Kong Bananza, and I'm going to be ranking them from worst to best. Normally for these sorts of videos, I like to kind of clarify the exact criteria, and I guess I'll kind of do that here. The theming's going to be a big part. I'll take into account both that layer within the game itself, so any boss fights or like story beats that happen there, but also just the 100% journey. But most importantly, this is going to be ranked based off vibes. Do I find this layer fun? Is this a layer I will go back to replay? Does this layer allow Donkey Kong's killer moveset to shine through? That is going to be the main criteria we're ranking these based off of. And one last thing before we jump in, there are multiple different like sub layers that all kind of count towards the same layer. For example, the Lagoon layer has SL 100, but then also SL 101 and then SL 102, all of those combined for the Lagoon layer. With that out of the way, that's more than enough messing around. Let's dive right into the ranking. Coming in at number 18, this is not going to be much of a surprise. In fact, number 18 and 17 are ones you can probably already guess if you have played through the game. As the worst two layers in this title are the Divide and The Junction. These are nothing more than filler layers that, while yes, they technically have their own moons and like a little challenge room, they're mainly used to either split up your path to either the freezer or forest layer, or then reconvene your path after you beat them. I gotta say the Junction layer is worse than the Divide for a couple of main reasons. The first one is that this layer is a glorified boss fight layer where you encounter Void Kong. However, a lot of this boss fight doesn't even really take place on this layer, as you have to travel from layer to layer, and in my opinion, this was one of the weakest parts of the game, because it just feels like a boss fight that's split up between different loading screens as you go between layers. On top of that, the Junction has 15 bananas, so theoretically there is more content here, but in my opinion, those extra 5 bananas are not nearly enough to say it's better than the Divide, and that is mainly because the Divide has some absolutely killer music. I said it already, the vibes are gonna factor in pretty heavily here. And the Junction not only has no music to speak of, but also comes after the Divide. Meaning when you're playing through this game for the first time, the Divide kind of hits you like a bag of bricks. You go from running around in these cartoonish levels as a monkey grabbing bananas to this almost somber, melancholic void. Melancholy is not something new for the Donkey Kong series, especially in the Donkey Kong Country games, but I love this sort of vibe all the same. The music really fits that vibe, and it doesn't really fit the game at all, but again, I kind of like that weird melancholic vibe you get here. Yes, the Divide is still just a glorified level select between the forest and freezer layers, so obviously it doesn't really deserve anything higher than number 17 on this list. But I think it's better than the Junction because even though it technically has less bananas or like main content within the kingdom, I think the vibe is way better, and I like the idea of having to pick between the different levels, which you do in the Divide, rather than the Junction, which just doesn't matter which level you pick, it kind of puts you back in the same spot. Number 16 is a layer that I almost didn't even want to rank in this video, and that is because it is the only layer you can't play in the game unless you buy the DLC. That is obviously DK Island as part of the DK Island and Emerald Rush expansion pack. Now, I have a lot of thoughts on this pack as a whole. DK Island as a layer really does not have much to do on it at all. There are some cool interactable objects, like Funky Kong's surfboard that you can pick up and surf around, and one banana-shaped fractone that'll give you a bunch of puzzles that you can end up looking up because they're so difficult and then completing and getting a clothing item. But there's no actual bananas to be found here, nothing of the sort. There's no challenge rooms, the only thing are the bonus rooms that only give you gold, and even those are reused from the main campaign. There's a ton of cool references, but in terms of actual stuff to do, you could argue there's even less to do here than in the Divide and Junction layers. This is technically true, and many detractors of this paid DLC expansion have brought this up. However, the one thing that they all neglect to mention is that that DK Island is the home of the Emerald Rush side mode. Emerald Rush is a side mode that I personally love. I have played it a bunch, and the more I play it, the more I enjoy it. I am the type of gamer that does not need some massive story. If I think the gameplay is fun, I will just play the game over and over again to watch a number go up, try and chase a high score. I've logged hundreds of hours in Balatro chasing high scores, and I'm going to log a bunch in Emerald Rush as well, because I just keep going back to it. It's pretty fun. However, you can play Emerald Rush on pretty much every major layer of this game after you've played enough and unlocked them. So I've made the difficult decision to not include Emerald Rush in this ranking. There are some layers that are way more fun to do Emerald Rush on than others, but it doesn't necessarily seem fair for me to rank the Canyon layer a lot lower just because I think Emerald Rush on that layer sucks. When, in all honesty, the Canyon layer was probably not designed with Emerald Rush in mind. Emerald Rush kind of seems like something they added a bit midway through development and then packaged up as its own thing for the DLC. I appreciate this DLC so much because it's not more of the same. It's something completely different. Yeah, it would have been cool to see some bananas and, actual things to do on Donkey Kong Island other than Emerald Rush, but Emerald Rush being so different from the rest of the game more than makes up for it, at least in my opinion. I just enjoyed the mechanics of this game so much that I'm looking for endless stuff to do, and Emerald Rush to me is that. It's a high score chasing roguelite side mode. It's fun. It's what I wanted. However, again, it's not fair to include that when ranking the other layers in this game, which leaves DK Island in a weird spot. DK Island basically exists as a home base for Emerald Rush. The statues you unlock in Emerald Rush belong here. You start Emerald Rush from here, and you even get this layer by paying for the Emerald Rush expansion pass.
I like money.
Because I'm not including, say again, how fun I think Emerald Rush is on the Canyon layer in the Canyon layers part of the ranking, I will also be excluding Emerald Rush from the DK Island ranking, which leaves it as just a pretty barren hub world with really nothing to do. However, if I was able to include Emerald Rush in this, then considering that DK Island is where you have to go to talk to Void Kong to start Emerald Rush, I would have DK Island probably at number 1 of this whole video. I am a big fan of the Emerald Rush side mode. I think once you beat the game, it's an absolute blast, but again, it doesn't really make sense to include Emerald Rush in this ranking, and when you take the Emerald Rush out of DK Island, you get a pretty barren wasteland full of cool references, but no substance. Alright, moving on to number 15. This is the first, actual layer, and this one really pains me. Number 15, we have the racing layer. Yes, it absolutely pains me to put this at number 15, but the more and more I think about it, the more I kind of have to admit, this is the one, actual layer in this game that I would say Nintendo kind of fumbled. First of all, it is awesome seeing Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong back at it again. The dialogue you get when encountering them the first time is full of all sorts of Easter eggs that Donkey Kong fanatics like me absolutely started drooling over. It was so sick. Not only that, but they take Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong and place them as your competition in this super fun and really interesting Ramby Rumble racing minigame. This is obviously where the racing layer gets its name, and as far as the actual racing minigame goes, I think they hit the nail on the head. Ramby Rumble is an incredibly fun side mode that perfectly demonstrates how the cool destruction and mechanics we've learned throughout the rest of the game could be incorporated into a really fun and unique racing minigame. I absolutely love the Ramby Rumble racing mode here. In fact, I like it far more than the Chivarian bounce ball minigame or bound ball, whatever it was called, that you had in the Snow Kingdom of Mario Odyssey. And I kind of, consider this a bit of a spiritual successor. It's like halfway through the game, you get this weird racing minigame and it's fun. But compared to bound ball, which only ever really aggravated me, I didn't really like the controls there, this game mode is absolutely sick. However, the problem is that is all that's here. There are only 10 bananas in this entire layer, and they totally had more room for more bananas on these auxiliary islands floating around the track, but I was so disappointed to find out that there's just nothing here. That would be perfectly fine if there was more to do within the racing itself. What I mean by that is that even though there is so much fun depth to this Ramby Rumble minigame, there is so much missed potential in how you actually race it. There is only one race course. It's the one you see right in front of you as soon as you land in this kingdom. Or layer, sorry, I'm gonna mess that up a bunch. Now, technically there are 2 different races you can do here. There's an easier race and then a harder race that does introduce new mechanics, but to be honest, the core mechanics of this minigame are so well fleshed out and so interesting that there should 100% be more stuff to do within Ramby Rumble. I'm talking even more time-based difficult challenges, maybe entirely new race courses that you could teleport to. Hell, even an online leaderboard, which was there again in Mario Odyssey for Bound Ball, would go a long way in making this feel like more of just a one-time side distraction. Because as of right now, that's all the Racing Kingdom is. I really do enjoy the mechanics on display here. In fact, I'll probably continue to play and just try and improve my own personal time, but even doing something as simple as adding in more difficult bananas to collect that require a harder time to beat, or even just adding in an online leaderboard that will let you play against friends or see randoms online, that would have done so much more. But as is right now, this is a layer I really want to love, and everything here I do love, but there's really just nothing here besides 2 actual races that don't even really change up that much between the races. Number 14 is the Landfill layer. This is a perfectly fine layer on your first playthrough. In fact, the first time I encountered this layer, I was actually pretty stoked. I thought it was really neat. The whole mechanic really leaning into the destruction even more, where the entire layer is underground, you have to dig down, carve your own tunnels. I like that a lot. I thought it was super interesting. However, 100%ing this layer is probably the worst layer to 100% in the entire game. I will always give the developers of this game credit because the camera and everything in this game should break a lot more than it does. And I think the camera is the easiest thing to point fingers at because there are times where it is a little odd, but most of the time, for considering how complex the destruction and terrain of this game is, most of the time the camera does great. However, the Landfill layer is one of those times where it'll bug out more times than not. You'll sometimes just get hit with complete Janktown 3000, and there's really just nothing you can do, especially inside this pipe. It was super disorienting and just not that good, especially considering you have to dig out your own paths and plot your own course throughout this layer. The camera issues really show up strong here, and not in a good way. On top of that, this is a somewhat smaller layer in the grand scheme of things. It only has 1 sublayer, SL1000, but it is like a deep sublayer, so I don't think that's necessarily a problem. But there's only 27 bananas and 30 fossils to find here, so it's not like this layer is hitting you over the head with a ton of unique concepts like you'll see later on. And on top of that, there just weren't that many memorable bananas here. I specifically did like one of the challenge rooms where it's like the destruction one where you have to play as the elephant bonanza. I like that a lot, but a lot of the bananas that aren't in their own little challenge sections are pretty trivial because you can see them while you're underground, because like the entire environment is culled out, so you can kind of just see where they're supposed to be, and then you just tunnel directly to the banana. And sometimes there's like cool little challenges to get to that banana, but most of the time it doesn't even matter because you can just tunnel straight through it, and you're kind of avoiding the cool parts of this layer by doing that. But this is the only layer where I actually felt like it kind of encourages you to do that, because again, it just straight up shows you where the banana is. I don't know, I wasn't in love with the Landfill layer. Coming in at number 13, this one might be controversial. We have the Hilltop layer. First of all, this has one of the best challenge layers in the entire game, with Nostalgia Country, and the secret banana in that challenge layer being in Donkey Kong's house, just like OG Donkey Kong Country. Man, I loved it. I mean, you can tell, I'm a Donkey Kong fan. I eat this stuff up, man. I also like a lot of other things that this layer does. It introduces you to the fractones, which I absolutely love. I think the fractones are one of the best new additions to this game. This is where you truly get to experiment with stuff like the turf surf and even the chunk jump, but overall, this layer just kind of feels like filler. I'm not gonna lie, it felt like a tutorial layer that came after 2 other tutorial layers. In my opinion, if you're playing through the campaign casually, the game doesn't really hit its stride until the next layer, which is the canyon layer. I think that's perfectly fine, as the initial Ingot Isle tutorial, alongside the Lagoon layer, do a great job of teaching you what the game is going to be like. However, I don't know, man, the Hilltop layer coming after those 2, again, it just feels like a 3rd straight kind of tutorial layer. It's just a bit plain, without pretty much anything going for it. It doesn't have any other sublayers. What you see is what you get. And despite the cool aesthetics, I just didn't think the Hilltop layer did really anything that special. Coming in at number 12, we have the Forbidden layer. This is extremely eerie on your first playthrough because initially you think this is the planet core. All of the fractones being a complete jerk to Donkey Kong, telling you to leave and not go any further, is honestly kind of terrifying considering how jovial they've been throughout the entire rest of the campaign. Obviously, spoiler alert, but this is also where King K. Rool makes his glorious return, which I haven't actually talked about this yet on the channel, but holy crap, I was losing my mind when I saw this for the first time. Seeing this absolute unit come on screen is phenomenal, and we get that introduction for the first time in the Forbidden layer. I also absolutely adore this mechanic where you have to throw the different chunks to make bridges. Not only is this just an excellent demonstration of the destruction and I guess construction mechanics of Donkey Kong Bananza, but it's used in some incredibly creative ways, with neat bananas hidden off to the side, and even cooler, in one of this game's best boss fights with Void Kong. This is a pretty small layer, all things considered. There's only 25 bananas here, and the Forbidden layer is far more linear than the more conventional levels we'll get to later on, but with all that said, this layer still slaps. To be honest, I don't really have any problems with it. It's just smaller in scope, which is preventing it from being higher up on this list, but everything that was here is really cool, and it makes for a great set piece for one of this game's most iconic moments, that being the reintroduction of King K. Rool. At number 11, we have the Groove layer. This is such a distinct and unique layer compared to the rest of the game. There is not that much that's destructible here, but in my opinion, this acts as a great change of pace specifically for this point in the main campaign. The Groove layer also has a storyline that can be continued on even after defeating K. Rool and defeating the main campaign, which I really liked. Going back to all these layers to 100% the game after I initially beat the campaign was obviously a blast because I just love this game, but realizing that there was more story stuff to do in the Groove layer after beating the main campaign made me enjoy it that much more. The aesthetics are cool, breaking out of jail was fun, but I think the main reason they added that additional campaign is because going back to 100% this layer without the campaign is kind of odd. Just because of the way the layer is laid out, it kind of feels like a collection of different challenge layers rather than one cohesive world. Rebuilding that little concert hall though was an absolute blast. I really did enjoy that, and I like that this layer houses a museum that'll show you the fossils you've collected, another great touch in this title. To sum it up, the Groove layer is cool, but again, kind of acts as a little bit of a detour in the grand scheme of things, not being as, well, traditional, I guess conventional of a layer as something like, you know, Canyon, Tempest, even Lagoon. Like, there are so many other layers in this game that are kind of big open areas that have puzzles spread throughout, whereas the Groove layer just does not give that vibe at all. Now that we're at number 10, I've said this before, but all the layers I'm going to be talking about from now on, I absolutely love. Like, I really don't have that much criticism. It's just some of them are bigger and then therefore have more stuff to praise than others, which is kind of how I'm deciding the ranking from this point on. And to that point, number 10 is Ingot Isle. This is both the first and last layer you get in the game. It's where you start off, but you can't go back to it until after you defeat the main campaign. There is some stuff that I do not enjoy about Ingot Isle, mainly that there are no fossils here, meaning there's no costumes you can buy here. I think that is really dumb. I think this game is sorely missing like a couple of cool costumes, like the Mario 64 costume you got in Odyssey, and I kind of assumed they would be here, but there's no fossils, therefore no costumes, and that just kind of makes me sad. I think that's dumb. However, despite that small misstep, Ingot Isle does have a lot of fun challenges, especially considering that the developers know you've already beaten the game at this point, so they're more willing to put in some difficult challenges that really test your might as Donkey Kong. Specifically, I'm talking about the enemy rush and the boss rush, which I both absolutely love. Those are two high points for the entire game for me. They reminded me a lot of that final level in World Crown in 3D World, not Champions Road, but like the purple mystery house one, where it's just a bunch of tough challenges, one after another after another. That's what the enemy version of this felt like to me, and then the boss rush was just everything I could want in a boss rush. For a game that quite frequently had bosses that in my opinion were a little bit too easy, they are not messing around with these final bosses. They're all remixed into a lot more difficult ways with some sort of interesting gimmick that was an absolute genuine treat. I also love the dialogue you get here with the various NPCs. Specifically, I love that you have to pay Grumpy Kong to actually construct those two challenges and then one final secret at the end of the game too with the big statue. I know he asks for like a ridiculous amount of gold, but I like that. I think that's fun. I mean, it encourages you to play the game more and just get a bunch of gold. If you're gonna 100% the game, you're probably gonna have that much money anyway. I have absolutely no problem with Nintendo doing something like that. Like 120,000 gold for the final Grumpy Kong thing, yeah, that's a lot, but I don't care. I think it's perfectly fine that they ask for that. In fact, I kind of like it because it gives me something to work towards. It's also just fun to go back once you have enough gold and then see what Grumpy Kong's gonna build. I think Grumpy Kong, and obviously the stuff he builds being mainly the boss fight thing, that carries this layer a lot in my opinion. Coming in at number 9, we have the Radiance layer. This is the first layer where you actually get a Bonanza, and by and large, I think the layers where you receive a new Bonanza power are the best in the game. That's a bit of a generalization, but Radiance, Tempest, Lagoon, Freezer, and Forest are definitely some of the best levels in this entire title. However, Radiance is my personal least favorite. To be honest, I also think the Snake Bonanza is probably my least favorite Bonanza, so I guess it kinda goes hand in hand with that. I have a couple main problems with the Radiance layer. First thing, I'm not a huge fan of the light mechanic. Yes, it was a cool mechanic, and I'm not even gonna lie, there are some cool puzzles that get resulted because of that mechanic. I specifically like the enemies where you have to like have them in the light before you kill them, but I don't know, man. There's something so visceral about like everything else in this game, like all the destruction, all of that. It's so fun that when you have to kind of like pause and make sure that the light is shining on the right place, I don't know, I just wasn't a huge fan of that. Maybe my monkey brain doesn't want to devote just more than one brain cell to anything other than bananas, but I don't care. I still didn't really enjoy it. More importantly though, I just don't like the way this layer is laid out at all. You start with SL 1200, which has pretty much nothing. There's 3 bananas up there. Then you get to what I'd consider the main layer, where you unlock the Snake Bonanza, and that one's fun. That's probably the best layer in the game. The layer after that was okay, pretty forgettable. And then SL 1203 is like the biggest layer in the entire thing. It honestly reminds me of the Hilltop layer because it's kind of just one big open rolling hills area. Technically, this is probably the best sub-layer in the entire Radiance layer, but in my opinion, it's also kind of the worst, because you just unlock unlock the snake bonanza, and then you get this wide open, like, prairie area that doesn't use the snake bonanza at all. It's also visually not that interesting. And then the other half of the layer is just more of those light-based puzzles, which not only do I think are not that fun, but are also super easy to cheese by just doing some turf surf chunk jump or using the snake and the ostrich. So I don't know, nothing just really super landed for me in the Radiance layer. Number 8 is the planet core, and holy crap, the OG Donkey Kong Country enemies are back. That is absolutely sick, and I also love how the game difficulty increases here. This isn't just a layer, it's an absolute gauntlet, as you have to make your way through by far the most sub-layers in the entire game for one layer. However, each sub-layer is kind of just its own challenge, where the main challenge is getting through it. Yeah, they have 1 or 2 or 3 bananas hidden off to the side, but it honestly feels more like a collection of challenge levels rather than one cohesive layer, which I think works fine because it's a good like ending to the game with where it constantly is building up and ramping up. I like that, but again, just going back to 100% it's not nearly as fun as some of the other layers. That honestly doesn't mean a ton in the grand scheme of things though, because the first time you encounter this layer, it is just so fun. That incredibly ominous statue of King K. Rool, again, seeing all those DKC enemies finally back, all that stuff is awesome. This layer is sick, but nothing really holds a candle to its ending, which is the unbelievable King K. Rool boss fight. That boss fight's awesome, and if we're counting the New Donk City boss fight, because technically that does take place in this layer, and once you beat it, if you want to like re-trigger it, you have to go to this layer. So I'm gonna count it. Yeah, New Donk City counts as part of the planet core, screw it. That is also really sick. I mean, just could not be better. Like, going to New Donk City, what the heck, man, they cooked with that. This is also where you encounter the final challenge of this game after you do all the like Bonanza side quests after you beat the game. Then you go into the eel's like esophagus or whatever, and there's the final one difficult challenge. Honestly, that challenge was a little bit underwhelming to me, but it was pretty fun, and that's another plus for this layer because obviously it takes place at the end with the Banandium root. So yeah, the planet core does everything it needs to do really well. It's an excellent end to the game and really lets your skills shine through with some of the hardest challenges you'll get. Once again, it's just not necessarily a full layer, so that's why it's number 8 and not like number 1. I don't really have any criticism besides just it wasn't going for anything bigger. Speaking of going for something bigger, number 7 is the canyon layer. This level is where you realize just how much freedom this game gives you. It's laid out in a way that practically encourages sequence breaking. You can skip entire sections of this level by chaining jumps with chunk jumps and all that, and just seeing how open this area was really just opened my eyes for what the rest of this game has in store. I also did enjoy the sub-layers here a decent bit. Specifically, there's one that heavily emphasizes mine carts, which are used to get around in the top layer, but then creatively used in combat and puzzles by forcing you to time up bombs as you're driving past and being used in a boss fight, which I did really enjoy. The final boss fight against Grumpy Kong absolutely sucks though, it's not that good. I like the canyon layer a lot, it's really good. I find it kind of odd that it's a giraffe themed layer, but there's no giraffe bonanza. I definitely thought we were gonna get something there, but whatever. There's a decent amount of fun bananas and cool puzzles here, and this is by far the biggest layer we've talked about yet, with a whopping 80 bananas to find. I just think the theming doesn't really go for anything super crazy. I mean, yeah, it's a canyon, there are some smokestacks. There's also not really a major point of interest in this level, like something like the eggshell hotel in the forest layer, which I do think holds back the canyon layer a little bit from being one of my personal favorites in the game, but it's still an absolute blast. There are some really creative bananas to find here, and just the overall open nature of the level encourages you to experiment with Donkey Kong's awesome movement. Coming in at number 6 is the biggest layer in the entire game, at least in terms of bananas you can collect, that being the freezer layer. First things first, having an ice level themed around ice cream is really cool. I like that. I also like that the ice layer is not afraid to have lava in it, especially for only being like the 4th actual layer you play in this game. I was really stoked to see them throw in some lava here, because otherwise this thing would be a cakewalk. There are tons of awesome bananas to be found here, like near the giant freezer zebra, but to be honest, it's a little bit overstuffed. This one definitely had a couple of bananas that were just like in snow that kind of felt reminiscent to the moons everyone always talks about in Odyssey that they don't like, that were just kind of floating on a rock. I don't really dislike that those are there. I don't have a problem with just getting an easy banana every once in a while, but the freezer layer definitely had the highest amount of those, and also everything was just kind of spread out because you're supposed to use the zebra bonanza, which is the super fast one. And that kind of drags me into my biggest gripe about the freezer layer, which is just the zebra bonanza. I don't think it controls super well. I understand the dash you can do as the zebra is like supposed to make it difficult to control, but I don't know, when Donkey Kong is so buttery smooth otherwise, it just kind of gave, I don't know, I didn't really like it. I also am not a huge fan of the mechanic where there's like ice cream chunks that fall from the sky and then you have to use those to clear out the lava, especially for just being the 4th layer you'll encounter. This is a really easy mechanic to just completely screw up, and if you screw up the path and lead these ice cubes somewhere you don't want them to go, you're kind of just screwed and have to restart the entire layer by resetting the terrain. Overall, this is a great great layer, and it's filled with creative ideas. I think it would have been a bit better if it was a little bit smaller, more compact. And again, a couple of the core mechanics I wasn't a huge fan of, like that ice cube thing with the lava and just the zebra bonanza in general. But even still, the number 6th best layer in this game would be like my favorite level in any other 3D platformer. That's how much I love this game. I'm just holding these things to a really high standard because there is so much pure excellence here. Speaking of pure excellence, let's jump into number 5. I'm pretty sure all of these layers I don't have a single complaint. Number 5 is the Lagoon layer, the first actual layer you encounter after the Ingot Isle tutorial, and man, they absolutely peaked with this one in terms of theming. I genuinely think this has probably the best music in the entire game. It's just so catchy and fits the Donkey Kong vibe tremendously, and also the aesthetic is just such a vibe. It's an absolute blast to surf around with the surf turf ability. That was one of the first things I unlocked, and I did so in this layer because I was like, I gotta get around on this water, man. And I'm so glad I did. It's just super satisfying to do. And in terms of the actual campaign stuff you do here, raising the water levels was super fun. It was a great tutorial to like throwing stuff. And I also love any sort of level gimmick where you do something and then the level itself changes. In this case, the water raises up, allowing for new paths and places to go. I'm just a sucker for that stuff. This layer also introduces the bomb rocks, which are a great mechanic that kind of show up throughout the entire rest of the game. I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure they're like somewhat in every layer, but they're introduced here. And because of that, there's a ton of unique areas that do a great job of showing you just how destructive the destruction can be. On top of that, I feel like this layer had a couple of really fun bananas that incorporated the climbing, not just climbing up stuff, but mainly like hanging from the ceiling. Everything about this I love. I love the actual mechanics of it. I think it's fun. I love the animations of Donkey Kong while he's on the ceiling. I love the bananas that are hidden up here, and I'm kind of sad that this is the layer that really dives into that part of Donkey Kong's toolset the most, because there's not really that many other places. Like, sure, there will be challenge layers where you have to climb from the ceiling, but rarely was it incorporated in an actual kingdom to the degree it was here, which I guess is kind of a bummer because, again, I do like this mechanic, but what is here is fun, so I'm not going to knock the Lagoon layer for having the most of a mechanic I enjoy. The only reason this isn't any higher up is because, once again, it's more of an introductory layer, so 100%ing this level is the most fun you'll have here. If you're just kind of breezing through it, playing the campaign, you'll finish it pretty much in 2 seconds. It's not that hard. However, like the Cascade Kingdom from Mario Odyssey, it may not be the best this game has to offer, but it's a damn good official first level. Also, unlike Cascade Kingdom from Mario Odyssey, this is an absolute blast to 100% in my opinion. There's some really good challenges here. I just think it's super fun. Coming in at number 4, we have the Tempest layer. The Elephant Bonanza sucks. No, it's actually great though. It breaks the game, but you're far enough along that regular punching might have gotten stale by now. So luckily, if you're bored, you can just switch to the elephant and destroy the entire level. On top of that, the storm setting here is really unique and could have easily been annoying if not for it being pulled off properly. The vibes are unmatched here. It kind of feels like the Ruined Kingdom with that purpley lightning, but the elephants all being storm chasers in raincoats is such a great vibe. And I think the actual elephant town here is my favorite like town location in the entire game. I love how studious these guys all are. There's books galore, and I think that lends to just how cozy it feels. They're hiding away from the storm, and I don't know, I just really like the way this one feels to play. The lightning is kind of annoying in the open sections, but the journey over chasms and the sheer quality of bananas here really redeems it. I found myself consistently enjoying the bananas here more than almost every other layer in the game. They're super creative with this one. On top of that, you get some super dope mechanics. The Elephant Bonanza obviously is the main one that comes to mind, but even beyond that, just stuff like picking up a chunk of rock to shield you from the acid rain, or using a chunk of rock as a zip line. There was a lot of fun stuff here. The boss fight against that bat like Blunderwing I think it's called?
Blusterwing.
I don't know what it's called, but that was a super fun boss fight. And actually, that's a good point, because the entire last layer is a great example of what I want like a sub-layer in this game to be. We've already explored the main world that's kind of a more open environment, and then you had your puzzle box area with all the lava, meaning this final layer is just kind of a linear challenge. But because it's a linear challenge, the developers are able to use all the mechanics you've learned and introduce some new ones in such unique and interesting ways. To get up to the final boss, you have to use the material that lets you float when you grab it, but it's so high up that you have to suck some of that up with the elephant and then pull it out midair to get even more like lift. It's, I don't know, I just absolutely loved it. I love the Tempest layer, man. The vibes were absolutely phenomenal. I'm super glad they went back to this kind of dark lightning, medieval-ish, stormy aesthetic of the Ruined Kingdom from Mario Odyssey, because getting that kind of aesthetic, which is what this is, in like an actual full-blown kingdom rather than just a glorified boss arena, I loved it, man. I think the Tempest layer is brilliant. Before we get to number 3 on this list, I'm gonna have to ask you something. No, I'm not asking you to subscribe, although that would be nice. I'm asking you to activate all of your neurons and think back to the intro of this video, assuming you didn't just randomly skip to this point, where I said that this was going to be ranked off vibes. I'm reminding you of that because number 3 is by far the most vibes-based ranking on this entire list. That is the Resort Isle. This fruity oasis is an absolute treat to explore because no matter what you're doing, you are chilling out thanks to the most satisfying song in the entire game. However, I don't just want to talk about the music. In terms of sound design, there is so much on display here. Walking over a strawberry, picking out a chunk of watermelon. It all sounds perfect. It just sounds like I don't know how to describe it. It sounds yummy. That's the best way I could put it. Not just that, but then we move over to the graphics and all this food looks delicious too. The fruit all just looks juicy as heck. I mean, there are definitely other layers in this game that try and do more, but from a presentation standpoint, the little things shine here in the resort layer. And because of that, I think it's my favorite layer to just kind of mess around in. I think a lot of that too is also just because of how this layer is laid out. You're gonna be surfing from island to island, which I've already talked up a ton. I love the surfing in this game. But more importantly, I want to talk about the liftoff ore, which allows you to access the verticality of this layer, because there are multiple floating islands in the sky, all with their own unique fun challenges. This liftoff ore is introduced in this layer, and I think this is my favorite type of terrain in the entire game. Not only is it super satisfying to smack these blue dudes and watch them shoot out into the distance, creating a bridge of this stuff, but once you actually interact with the liftoff ore, it is just so fun. Watching DK and Pauline effortlessly lift up into the air, floating high up into the sky, it just doesn't get old. And especially, again, considering how fun some of the platforming mechanics are once you get into the sky, even though I've 100%ed this layer long ago, I often come back here and just traverse these floating islands because it's just plain fun. Everything about the resort layer feels extremely intentional. From stuff I've already mentioned, like the presentation, the sound effects, the palm trees that are shaped like bananas, the core design of the layer itself encouraging experimentation with, in my opinion, again, one of this game's coolest mechanics, that being the liftoff, or even something as meta as where it is placed in the game. You encounter the resort layer right after the junction boss fight, so it's a great break from all of the action up until that point, letting you just chill out, grab some bananas, and mess around in a layer that's just pure fun. There are no sub-layers here, and not that many bananas, which frankly is why it's not number 1 on this list, but if there was more content to be had here, it would be my favorite easily. Something about the resort layer just speaks to me on such a personal level. I don't know how. It's just so relaxing. I love it. It's my happy place, man. It's great, and that's why it's number 3 on this list. For number 2, we have probably the best designed level in the game. Yes, I understand that's a weird thing to say for number 2 and not number 1, but we'll get there. If you've been playing along, you know what number 2 and therefore what number 1 is or will be, and number 2 is the forest layer. I genuinely do believe this probably has the best raw level design in the game. There is absolutely phenomenal vertical platforming here, which is reinforced by these seeds that you throw at wood to spawn bridges, giving you verticality, and the ostrich bonanza unlocked in this layer that allows you to capitalize on that verticality once you already have it, soaring over massive pits of purple poison. This layer has the second most bananas in the entire game, second to only the freezer layer. However, unlike the freezer layer, I never felt like these bananas were super just out in the open. Even the easier ones required at least a little bit of platforming to even get up to where they were. And this entire level, including all of its different sub-layers, feel really compact and just smartly designed. There's something new around every single corner. The core point of interest being the eggshell hotel is just awesome, man. A hotel in a poison swamp surrounded by ostriches. The devs were on those good bananas when they were making this layer, and I'm so glad they were, because I don't know how they come up with this stuff, but it just works. It blows my mind how this game is consistently able to have unique ideas that make sense and, you know, kind of work within the story they're telling here, this Donkey Kong world, while those ideas also reinforce the gameplay and what makes this game such a joy to play. Again, for this layer, that's most apparent with the poison surrounding everything that places much higher of an emphasis on the verticality of this level, where you're working your way up a tree to get to the eggshell hotel for the first time, throwing these acorns which spawn bridges, which is just such a cool mechanic, and gliding around as an ostrich. It all works together in tandem to make this probably the best level design in the entire game. This layer feels expertly crafted in a way that us Nintendo fans have gotten to know all too well. Like, we're spoiled when it comes to 3D platformers. There's really no one else doing it like this team, and I think just playing through the forest layer and appreciating the sheer brilliance in terms of level design here is a great example as to why. It's non-stop fun for the entire playthrough. It's non-stop fun going back to it to 100%. There's over 80 damn bananas for when you do go back in 100%. I just don't know what's not to love about the forest layer. It's absolute peak. Okay, you've probably noticed so far that a lot of the best layers in this game, at least according to my ranking, are some of the earlier layers. I feel like as the game goes on, Nintendo kind of got more narrow and narrow, with smaller kingdoms that weren't as open, and just didn't necessarily have the same design ethos as we see in something like the forest layer, or the canyon layer, freezer layer, even resort layer. You don't really get that sort of open level design, even with something like the Radiance layer, but especially something like Forbidden, Planet Core, Landfill, it's just not really as there. However, that all goes out the window with one of the last layers in this entire game, and my absolute favorite, that being the Feast layer. First things first, this thing has a great visual style. What you'd think would be just normal rock and sand have now been transformed into pink rock salt and, well, just salt that is consistently used throughout this entire layer in clearing out the acid, which can also spawn its own enemies that'll shoot acid at you. And that entire mechanic I feel like was super fun. It's the same sort of thing as like throwing a boom rock at a wall, like you're throwing something as a projectile in order to clear out some of the path ahead. However, with the salt, it doesn't go boom.
Yes, Rico. Kaboom.
So you gotta be much more strategic with it, which lends to more challenging and interesting puzzles. The lava itself is also hot oil, continuing on with this feast theme, and that all culminates with the main thesis of this layer. You gotta go to these 5 different burger switches in order to build this massive burger, and I'm just gonna say it, making a big burger is fun. Sorry to all my vegetarian fans out there, I love burgers, and it was awesome to see this massive 12-story burger get formed in the middle of this kingdom. It was very weird, very bizarre, but that's like exactly what I want in a Donkey Kong platformer. This kingdom doesn't take itself seriously, and it's all the better for it. This food theme is on the backdrop of a theme park, and that allows the developers to go absolutely hog wild with different gameplay. Everything from a minecart roller coaster to a slow jungle cruise where the water is burning oil. This layer is absolutely massive and honestly kind of daunting and confusing when you first get to it, but it's laid out in a very cohesive way when you realize this is just a theme park. There's like different lands all throughout, the rides are equally spaced out, there's little minecarts that'll take you from like section to section. Once you realize that, oh yeah, I'm just in a theme park, the different rides, or in this case, expertly crafted challenging puzzles, just hit you with thrill after thrill after thrill after thrill. One thing I will say about this kingdom is that because it has these like big rides that are all kind of their own like little platforming mini challenges, there are sections that feel a lot more linear than you'd see in other kingdoms. However, unlike some kingdoms I've criticized in the past for having more linear sections, even if you just ignored the rides, there's so much to do within the main theme park area itself that this would still be a top 3 kingdom. And then you add in all those rides, which are super fun platforming little mini gauntlets, and it by far takes the #1 slot. I don't know why there's this giant lion here, if there was like a lion elder at some point in the lore, but somehow it fits, it works. The Ferris wheel is super fun to climb up, and there's only one small sub-layer here, which initially you'd think would be kind of a negative against this, but then you realize, okay, well, first of all, the main feast layer, like the first layer you get to, is the biggest out of any in the game if you count like sub-layers. But also, the second sub-layer you encounter is just peak. Once again, it's quality over quantity. The whole time you're in the feast layer, you're experimenting with the main mechanic I first brought up when I started discussing this layer, that being the salt, which you throw at the acid to clear the path. You'll also remember that I mentioned the acid can house its own enemies that spit the acid back at you. Well, in this sub-layer, there's a ton of steel, which can only be killed by, you guessed it, acid. So there's this really fun like puzzle interplay here, where you have to get the acid enemies to shoot the acid at you, and then it clears out the steel, and then you grab the salt to clear out the acid guys. I don't know, it just adds another interesting wrinkle or layer, I guess. Haha, see what layer ranking, smash like. It adds an interesting like extra wrinkle to this puzzle that we've already become intricately familiar with throughout the past, entire sublayer, but the extra wrinkle was able to make it fresh, and therefore warrants being its own sublayer. It's definitely able to like sustain that entire sublayer's puzzle design. I really don't have a single complaint about the feast layer. I think it's just game design peak like through and through. It's super fun to play, and not only that, but the various different challenge sections that are like the little 3 banana doors you smash through. I think the feast layer has some of the best like ones of those in the entire game as well. And I guess that kind of all leads into the biggest reason I think the feast layer is so fun for me, and that is because, as I said, this is one of the last layers in the game, the last like big main layer. So because of that, the game ramps up in difficulty a substantial amount once you get here, which was definitely, in my opinion, needed, and once again, just allows the core mechanics to shine. By getting a greater challenge, you feel a deeper connection to the mechanics of Donkey Kong and this game itself, and then a deeper reward when you conquer those challenges. I absolutely love the Feast Layer, and I absolutely love Donkey Kong Bananza, but I'm curious. Let me know down in the comments below. Do you agree with this ranking at all? I haven't watched anyone else's ranking, so I don't really know. I mean, I can't, like, I gotta imagine people like the Feast Layer. It was by far the standout for me. But who knows? Maybe some of the other stuff I've said is controversial, so let me know down in the comments below where you agree and disagree. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe if you're new, and then check out my ranking for the other big Switch 2 game, that being my ranking of all 30 tracks, yeah, not the intermissions, but the tracks in Mario Kart World. Spoiler alert, I put Peach Beach as the worst one, and people went crazy in the comments. If you want to yell at me, click the link on screen. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.